So during this time, we will be taking questions from the crowd. But before that, I was just wondering if each of you could share something from the seminar that, some discussion that might have been interesting, and what have you been What have you learned from interacting with other people within your field? So we could hear a little bit from each of you before we move into questions from the floor.
You want to go first? I'll rescue you. Come over here. Well, I've loved it. So our group was particularly loquacious and talkative, and it was beautiful and lovely. As you lead these things, you think, man, what if no one talked? But our group just was happy to talk and happy to share. And I was impressed by us quasi-older folks too, but hearing the undergraduates or the younger students, the master's and PhD students, as they're trying to work out this thing. Their minds are alive, and I was very encouraged.
Yeah, I guess from my group, it's just interesting to think through the practicalities of being a PhD student and the different things you might have to juggle in terms of teaching and research. And I think just being aware of those practicalities is really useful. That's one of the benefits of having a Christian community, is people who understand the real challenges, that you can't do everything. You can't be a perfect teacher and give that 40 hours a week and do good research and have a life outside of. So just the wisdom of the different periods of the PhD, that sometimes there's more busy times, sometimes less busy times. So it's just interesting to hear different perspectives from particularly students on what they're kind of facing in their particular, how they relate to their supervisor, how they relate to their colleagues. Yeah.
I was really impressed with the ideas and the maturity, the Christian maturity of the people in our group. They are ready to meet the challenges that they face, I think, or at least ready to engage them. But we talked about competitiveness. We talked about, what could be some positive contexts rather than negative, and in addition to negative context of being in a very competitive space. We talked about teamwork. We had a lot of, we talked about Martin, say his name. Martin with an H, who apparently had given a talk that we all want to hear about how to flourish in academia. And so I think we've got some ideas for moving forward. But then the other thing that we talked about a little bit was, or what one of our participants talked about was how engaging with theory that you don't necessarily agree with or can be a sharpening of your perspectives, because it forces you to ask hard questions and to come up with and to think about why you believe what you believe. And so all of these things are really heartening to see and hear, and I'm forgetting things, but they'll come back around.
Yes, very, very encouraged to see Christians wanting to live for Christ in their workplace. And one big step is that they apparently a Christian mathematician societies have already been formed as we speak. And encouraging people to take just one little step after this conference to make a difference in your workplace. So great. It's always great to see young people, because we're in the declining years of our lives, or me anyway.
That's great, guys. So now we're just going to move into our question and answer. So if you really wanted to ask a question during the previous Q&A sessions and you couldn't, now is your time. And if you have any other questions as well. So we'll have two people. We have John and Daniel with microphones. So if you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll make sure a microphone gets to you. Not everybody at once, please.
Thank you all for your talks today. They've been really enlightening, and I found the discussion we just had also very enlightening. So my question is related to something actually we were talking about in our break-off session kind of afterwards, that this idea of how bold should we be as Christians in academia. And it was mentioned before, like, Cambridge is a secular university, but to my eyes, looking around here, I see saints and crosses everywhere and thousands of years of, well, hundreds of years of Christian history. And that actually this university has only been secular for a very short period of time. And I'm wondering, I think contemporary Christians are very comfortable being the Joseph, saying, I'm going to be in a secular place and I'll use my Christian character to be a good secular manager of that place. But to what degree should we be seeking to be more of like a David, to say we are using what is sort of a secular office for the good of the kingdom? So if we did become the provost, to your example, how much should we be seeking to return our university to its Christian heritage? Or if it wasn't Christian when it was founded, to guide the policy of the university so that we might be more edifying to people's souls, and use that as a tool of evangelism, not on a personal level, but at the level of the university? Sorry if that's a long question.
Maybe if I can start, we have control over different areas. A PhD student has very little control over, they control their thesis and that's about it. But a postdoc might have some more authority. They might have a couple of master students they get to supervise, maybe a PhD student. My interest so far is shaping my field of research as much as I can in a Christian direction. And long term, I see some hope for that at least a Christian perspective becomes a live option within my field of research. So that's my goal. Institutionally, that requires there being multiple Christians who are interested in, I think there's definitely institutional options, like at least having Christian communities within an institution is a good way to start. And it can definitely shape the way that an institute looks. So I did my undergrad in philosophy and biology, and the philosophy department had a number of Christian professors, and that made a very big difference. That department was very different. So about a quarter of the faculty would have been Christians. That department was much more open to the gospel than the biology department, which had no public Christian professors. So just having a few Christians can make a big difference to a department. And that would be my interest going forward. Yep.
That's great. I have a number of thoughts. It's a good question. So I think in the one sense, whatever the details of your eschatology, we know that God wins in the end, and that the knowledge of God, or the knowledge of the glory of God, will cover the earth like the waters cover the sea. So we know God wins in the end. So depending on the details of your eschatology, what does that look like, right? So it's very possible that in 10 years or 10 million years, Cambridge will be full of students walking throughout the university, praising God and singing hymns and devoting all their studies to the glory of God. That's very possible. So I think there's long-term, short-term things. So my son in the States talks about wanting to start a university. Well, that's great. I think that's a very the true learning might take place in small micro colleges rather than the Cambridges and Oxfords for the next century. I don't know, right? So there's a lot of various ways to think about your question, but I think you can start universities. That's also academia, right? And these can be explicitly Christian, if you like. There's study groups, there's reading groups. The real learning, not that's not happening here, but true learning might take place in lots of very interesting venues besides the traditional great world universities. At the same time, Christians being faithful here, I would encourage boldness, taking every thought captive, and who knows how God might honor that over a year, 10 years, 10 million years.
I mean, certainly I've had some, well, I wouldn't say influence, but I've been on chaplain appointment interviews, and I think it did make a difference, a massive difference. I guess different colleges are also different, that the chaplains, some of the chaplains may not be Christians at all. And that would be difficult for you to support a chapel if it isn't. But I think, yeah, I mean, I don't know whether that's relevant to your question, but I think there is a way in which we can influence the shape of our colleges and departments. I mean, I don't know. I know one other person in my department was Catholic, and we had a PhD student who was Christian that I spoke to, but there's no other as far as I know.
Yeah, I think this reminded me. I've been on appointment panels, and the most recent appointment panel that we had for a professor, he called me. Yeah, one of the candidates called me, and I just, as we were talking, I said, well, we were talking about the possibilities. How serious is this? How serious is there? An internal candidate? Is there some sort of whatever? He doesn't trust the process, right? And I said, well, I can guarantee that there isn't, and that we will be doing this in the way that we in the most ethical way that we can. But then I said, but I'm a woman of faith, and he's like, oh, so am I. A man, actually. And it was an interesting conversation because we were able to say that we don't know where God wants us, but we do know that we need to bloom where we're planted. And I don't have any big ideas, but I do. But sharing, but he did get hired, and I've every visiting student I've had come here, and we have a lot of them at the Center for Research in Children's Literature because it is kind of a niche area, and we're the biggest. And when they come, I share with them, and they whisper, right? They say, I'll say, well, I'm a Christian, and I said, one of the things you'll find out about me is I'm a Christian, and that it affects my scholarship. And oh, me too. Me too. I can't talk that way in my university in Germany, or I can't be really open like that in my university in Italy because it's so competitive. But knowing that you're here matters, and knowing that this is. So I think that's it. It's small things. It's small things. I mean, I think about we're supposed to be salt and light, and then I just think of the metaphor of a salt shaker. These little, and sometimes you can't even see that they're coming out of the little holes. But hopefully, if the salt is good, it is coming out and it is spreading around, and that's, I think, sometimes enough, right?
My question comes from on the sheet, one of the questions that we didn't get to discuss, but it starts with teaching is often neglected in academia. And over the past few years of doing my DPhil, I feel sometimes in despair at how I see undergraduates and graduate students just being neglected by the people tasked with teaching them. And I keep thinking over and over again, what needs to change? Is it an infrastructure issue? Is it an attitudinal thing? I had a supervisor of mine who was tasked with, she was my boss when I was doing my doctoral teaching fellowship. And she said, look, give them 10 minutes for a tutorial. That's it, because they'll take all the time you're willing to give them. And I just thought, absolutely, right? Jesus, he would do his 3 miracles and be like, I'm done. Like, I don't need to work today. And I cannot stand that mentality. But then, you also have to have time for yourself. And then there's the research. I mean, I don't know. Do any of you have something to say to that? What needs to change so that I feel like the fact that teaching is neglected in academia is a symptom of us not valuing people. We don't value people or mentorship or time with them. But for me, that's really where the magic happens,
Yeah, well, I think you've answered your question. Yeah, it's a great. So I teach at a Christian undergraduate setting where we're a teaching university. And then those of us who choose to publish, we get encouragement and maybe a little funding, but it's not like a research university. And so I would say that for a school like mine, like Union, it's very important that the provost, my former student, and the president and my dean and others leadership grasp that we're teaching first a teaching, and there is time enough to publish if you go for it. And so when they're hiring, they need to make that a priority and not hire folks who don't want to teach, because some folks don't have the gift of teaching. I mean, really, or at least they haven't developed it yet, and they need to be somewhere else teaching. But our school needs to be somewhere, at least where teaching continues to be prioritized, because that's what our founders were about. And that's what our charter's about, and all the rest. That's gonna be different than maybe here or Oxford, I suppose.
It is certainly different. I mean, the conversations that we're having in our faculty right now are, we teach too much. And because what is happening is it's hurting our research portfolios.
Yeah.
And so it's a big, and we're dependent on the REF, which is the Research Excellence Framework for funding. And so we have to have a robust research portfolio. There is a TEF, a Teaching Excellence Framework. But those are the conversations that we're having. How can we teach less? And I can say that, we have this model where 105 days of every year is supposed to be devoted to teaching, and 95 is supposed to be devoted to research, and 20 is to service. And it's wildly out of proportion in terms of what actually happens on the ground. So it's an ongoing conversation, but I think that's the way the question is framed is completely accurate.
Maybe just a quick comment. It is an opportunity for Christian distinctiveness. So in my context, it's giving time to graduate students. And people notice that, and they say, he's very attentive. He gave me the time. And that is a framework for gospel conversations and for people interested in what motivates this. So I think it's really important that Christians do give time for the people that they're specifically assigned to giving time for. It's very hard to balance that. But at least as a postdoc who has the opportunity to do some supervisions, I think really prioritizing those people is important.
Yeah, I mean, in Cambridge, we're very fortunate because we have a collegiate system, and we do give students a lot of time. I mean, I don't supervise anymore because I'm an examiner, but, I accompany my students to conferences, I take them places, and I guess what I find most useful is, I suppose, praying which student God will want you to carry on having a relationship with in the future after they're no longer your student. I think that's much, frees you up to actually talk to them as individuals, on a kind of equal footing, rather than you being the kind of a hierarchy. So I keep in touch with loads of students. And I guess also, I mean, like Zach was saying, giving them time. I mean, responding to them even when they're writing to you. I mean, they sometimes write to you in the middle of the night and that kind of thing, or they're stressed and they want to see you straight away, and you respond to them quickly. And even if you can't see them in person, you say, well, let's have an online meeting, or I can ring you if you like, that kind of thing, I think makes a lot of difference. And they know you care about them.
Okay, I think we have time for 2 more questions, but if we could take those 2 together, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, a quick kind of comment or sort of proposal. So first of all, you have to excuse me that I didn't attend the whole session, so I missed some part. But considering the teaching that Zachary and other people are talking, So in Cambridge, we have this whatever supervision one-to-one kind of role. But from my understanding, I've been in Cambridge last 4 years, been part of formation and other Christian Bible study groups. Could forming Christian mind come up with some sort of postgraduate mentorship across the UK or Europe, where you could, take the role of mentorship directly interacting with some people who already been in the field in different disciplines? Because I could see both personal as well as professionally, where I did my research in Cavendish, that this sort of mentorship in Christian mindset is potentially missing and slowly exponentially declining last few years in all academic sectors. Sometimes student comes to their interested Bible study groups or Christian fellowships, but most of the time either it focused on undergraduate or postgraduate. But to my understanding, there is not much postdoc with postgraduate sort of thing where you could actually fulfill the role of being your elder, being that role model. Of course, it is happening at the church, but it's not happening much in the academic. So I would like to hear your comments as how this proposal would work across all kind of ministries, especially in student ministry. Thank you.
Sounds like a question for you, Tim. It sounds like.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You could share your best experiences of being mentored or mentoring.
Okay.
And you guys can put it on your feedback form as to what you'd like to see us serve you in. Is that okay?
Sure. Oh, sure.
Also, if there is another question, maybe we could take that together and you guys can answer both. Or if not, just you can, right there, lady in green.
Something that came up a few times was the idea of having an answer ready for everything. And I think I'm in linguistics, and there's a bit of a preference when you're planning projects for what current relevant thing is this going to feed into. Can you take this linguistic thing you're looking at and make it relevant to debates around anything to do with LGBTQ relations, or can you make it post-colonial, or can you make it something else and include critical race theory? So do you have any ideas or insights in ways to kind of deal with the idea of things being framed as relevant that might not necessarily be the only way of looking at them?
Oh, thank you, guys. Okay, well, let's. So the first question, I don't have a great answer other than my own experience is having a doctor father who invested in me, and he was a Christian. He died young, sadly. But as I was going through the program, and then in my first teaching role, which is where I'm still at Union, he was an encouragement and gave me the opportunity to speak and those kind of things. On ma'am, your question, I've got my kind answer, then I got my snarky answer. And so my kind, gentle answer is something like, I would encourage students to devote your attention to deep questions, meaningful text, and in one sense, don't try to be relevant. In one sense, just do good work in a classic discipline on an old text, on an old thinker, and go deep into your area. And as you go deep, you take little forays off into other angles. And if you want to apply that to questions of race or whatever, but all those fads are going to fade very quickly. Avoid them like the plague in general, okay? And just do good substantive scholarship. And if you can, find a supervisor who's not pressing you into whether it's LGBT or race, blah, 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 the sexual trans stuff. Just do good work in a great text, a great thinker. And as a Christian, you do want to ask, what is a Christian response on the question of race or on the sexual stuff, no doubt. But in one sense, my general suggestion is avoid some of the trendy stuff as far as making that the heart of your research, read a great text. Just, read about a great era, translate something, do real meaningful scholarship in the classic sense, and don't worry too much about being relevant.
My best experience being a mentor is 2.5 years ago. I teach for 6 weeks every other summer at Hollins University, which is a creative critical space for study of children's literature. And I mentioned that I would like to start a book group. And the program assistant was a Christian that I had taught before, so I knew she was a Christian. And so she assembled about 5 of us. And every Sunday, for 1 hour, we made a commitment that it would only take 1 hour. We started reading Christopher Watkins' Biblical Critical Theory. We read 1 chapter every week. There's 55 chapters, so it took over a year. And they're like, what's our next book? And so since then, we have read Mere Christianity, we have read Miracles, and we're now working through The Weight of Glory. And they have been so faithful to show up. They're on all different time zones all over. I'm the only one in the UK. There's people in California, there's people in Minnesota, there's people on the East Coast. And somehow we have made it work. And they have been such a supportive group for me. And they've been very complimentary about the ways in which this has helped their work. So if you can put together that small group and be faithful, that's a beautiful experience of mentorship. It's not big. Again, I'm in favor of the small because I think that that's where we develop the kinds of relationships that we need. But yeah, and as far as following trends, yeah, I'm with him, but not as much as the, read old books, because, I do young adult literature, and there's a new one every month. Yeah. But yeah, I think that if you don't love your project, then you're not going to invest in it. I mean, my cousin, when I was doing my PhD, my cousin was one of my best friends, and he wanted to do Faulkner. And his supervisor said, you can't be a white guy doing Faulkner. You got to do the Indian Problem or something like that. And he never finished. And so don't do something you can't invest in. That's the best advice I can give, because you're not gonna do your best work. You're not gonna be inspired. And there are easier ways to make a living than to do what you're doing. So.
So C.S. Lewis in it's either Learning in Wartime, Weight of Glory, says, or Mere Christianity, says, when you write, just try to tell the truth as clearly as you can. Don't try to be original. If you just tell the truth as clearly as you can, you'll tell the truth, and you'll end up being original in your own way. So I wouldn't worry about being trendy or even being original in one sense. Try to tell the truth as clear as you can, and you'll end up, in a sense, being original.
Just on mentorship, have been quite intentional in trying to find mentors in my field. So something you could do, for instance, is if you're going to a big international conference and you know that there's a Christian in your field who's speaking, you could email them beforehand, arrange to meet up. Whenever I was in Oxford, there was a professor I would always go and see who was one of the leaders in my field when I was a PhD student, or a postdoc, actually, thinking through which really helped me and him to kind of think through our research and how it might relate to faith. So yeah, I just encourage being intentional. It won't. People are out there, whichever field you're in, but you'll need to be intentional to find them, particularly in some fields there might be fewer Christians in, or might be seen as more hostile. Whichever field you name, with a little bit of work, I could suggest someone who is a leader in that field who is a Christian. And I think connecting to them would be always helpful.
That's a good point.
You need to say something.
If you want. Do you have anything to say?
Nothing to say. No. Yeah, I mean, I'm mentoring a younger person in another country. I think it's actually quite helpful, the mentorship relationship when you're not in the same university, then they can actually be very honest about their bosses. And I think it's a great idea because in the Anatomical Society, we've actually set up a mentorship program. And so it would be even better if you had a Christian mentorship program. That'd be great. That's Tim's job.
Okay, thank you so much for this panel discussion. Can we just give them a round of applause? I feel like they've worked really hard.
Thanks, Dawn.